Hi, and welcome to Shot of Justice.
The scent of stale coffee and desperation clung to the cheap motel room like cheap perfume. Outside, a neon sign flickered, casting erratic red shadows across the peeling wallpaper. David Miller sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the thin sheet of paper in his hand feeling heavier than a concrete block. It wasn't just a termination notice. It was an indictment, a public shaming. Gross misconduct, falsification of financial records, breach of fiduciary duty, immediate dismissal. His throat tightened, the words blurring. 20 minutes ago, he'd been David Miller, rising star at Carson Pierce Financial, tipped for the VP position, celebrating his 30th birthday with champagne wishes and a bright future, sketched out over lunch with his pregnant wife, Sarah. Now he was unemployed, unemployable in his field, and branded a criminal. The champagne felt like poison in his memory. He traced the damning signature at the bottom of the falsified loan documents, a near-perfect replica of his own. But he hadn't signed them. He knew he hadn't. The only other person who had access, who knew the systems, who stood to gain, was Mark Henderson. Mark, his supposed friend, his colleague, the man whose smooth charm and lazy smile had masked a viper's ambition. Mark, who had just been promoted into the position David was supposed to get. David remembered the look on Mark's face in the HR director's office, a carefully curated mask of shock and disappointment, tinged with just the right amount of smug satisfaction David only recognized in hindsight. "David, how could you?" Mark had murmured, shaking his head while the HR director laid out the company's devastating findings. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was a sucker punch to the gut, leaving him gasping for air in this dingy motel room, the weight of Sarah's silent tears pressing down on him, heavier than the termination letter. The years that followed were a slow, grinding erosion of everything David and Sarah had built. His reputation in finance was ash. Resumes vanished into black holes. Interviews ended abruptly when potential employers did background checks or made discreet calls to Carson Pierce. They sold their modest dream house, the nursery Sarah had painted a soft yellow, standing heartbreakingly empty after a miscarriage compounded their grief. They moved into a cramped apartment that smelled perpetually of fried onions from the unit below. David took whatever work he could find, stocking shelves overnight, driving a delivery van, his hands growing calloused, his spirit brittle. Sarah, bless her resilient heart, found work as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Her smile, once so easy and bright, became an effort, a shield against the world's pity. They lived frugally, haunted by the ghost of the life they'd planned. David's fury at Mark Henderson didn't fade. It calcified. It became a cold, hard stone lodged in his chest, a constant companion. He kept a mental ledger, every missed mortgage payment, every worried look on Sarah's face, every time he had to swallow his pride. Each entry fueled the ember of vengeance glowing within him. He knew Mark was living large, basking in the stolen success. Occasionally, David would catch a glimpse in a business journal, Henderson promoted again, Henderson hosting a charity gala, Henderson quoted as a financial guru. Each sighting was a fresh twist of the knife. One bleak winter evening, hunched over bills he couldn't pay, David made a silent vow. He wouldn't resort to violence or stupidity. He'd wait. He'd learn. And he'd hit Mark Henderson where it would hurt most, in the gleaming fortress of his ill-gotten wealth and reputation. He didn't know how, not yet, but the when was clear, when the time was right, when he had the means, when Henderson was most vulnerable. He'd wait 20 years if he had to. The path back wasn't glamorous. It started at night school. While Sarah slept exhausted, David pored over textbooks, his eyes gritty, fueled by cheap coffee and pure, unadulterated spite. He couldn't return to high finance, not with the stain Mark left. So he pivoted. He studied accounting, not the glamorous corporate kind, but the meticulous, detail-oriented world of personal and small business taxes. He became fascinated by the complex tapestry of the tax code, a labyrinth of rules, deductions, loopholes, and, crucially, vulnerabilities. He saw how easily fortunes could be built, and how devastatingly they could crumble if the foundations were rotten. He earned his certifications, slowly, painstakingly. He started small, preparing taxes for neighbors out of their cramped apartment, building a clientele based on word-of-mouth trust. He was thorough, patient, and surprisingly empathetic, understanding the anxiety surrounding money better than most. He helped elderly couples navigate pensions and Social Security. Small shop owners maximize their legitimate deductions. Single mothers claim every credit they deserved. He built his own tiny practice, Miller Financial Services, operating out of a modest one-room office above a hardware store. It smelled of sawdust and paper, a world away from Carson Pierce's marble foyer. Life stabilized, but the stone of vengeance never dissolved. Sarah saw it sometimes, a shadow crossing his face when Henderson's name appeared in the society pages. She worried. "David, it's been 10 years, 12, 15. Don't let him steal any more of your life. Look what we have." And he did look. He saw her strength, their shared resilience, the quiet comfort of their life now, free from the crushing weight of poverty. He loved her fiercely, but the injustice still burned. He'd promised himself. He wouldn't be reckless, but he wouldn't forget. He honed his craft. He became known in his community as the honest tax guy, the one who wouldn't push shady schemes but would fight legitimately for every dollar owed to his clients. He learned the subtle signs of financial trouble, the patterns of evasion, the desperation that sometimes led people to fudge numbers. He understood the immense quiet power of the IRS, not flashy, not fast, but inexorable. And he filed away every snippet of information he could find about Henderson Enterprises, Mark's burgeoning real estate development firm. Public records, news articles, property filings. David's meticulous nature found an outlet. It wasn't obsession, he told himself. It was reconnaissance. 20 years to the month after his world collapsed, David sat in his small, orderly office. Framed certifications hung on the wall. A thriving spider plant cascaded from a shelf. Outside, the small town he now called home went about its business. He was preparing taxes for Eleanor Winthrop, a spry octogenarian who owned several rental properties inherited from her husband. Eleanor was sharp as a tack, but hated all that tax folderol. "Now, David, dear," Eleanor said, peering over her cat-eye glasses, "these are the statements from that fancy management company Mark Henderson uses for the Briarwood complex. I sold that little duplex there last year, remember? Nasty business. Tried to lowball me terribly, that Henderson fellow. Smarmy. Reminded me of that used car salesman who sold Bert his first Cadillac." She shuffled papers, handing him a packet with the letterhead. Premier Property Management, a Henderson Enterprises company. David's fingers went cold. He forced his voice to stay level. "Premier handles the management for Henderson's own properties, too, I assume." "Oh, heavens, yes," Eleanor sniffed. "His own stuff, some partnerships, the works. Charged me an arm and a leg, too. Barely lifted a finger when the roof leaked. Had to get my own contractor. Made sure to deduct that, didn't I?" She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on an invoice. David methodically went through Eleanor's papers. His practiced eye scanned the premier statements, the summaries of income and expenses for her former property. Then, almost as an afterthought, Eleanor handed him another document. This came with the year-end stuff, some sort of consolidated summary for their side, I think. Looks like a mistake. Probably meant for Henderson himself, not little old me. "Throw it out, dear." David glanced at it. It wasn't meant for Eleanor. It was an internal Premier Property Management financial summary page, accidentally included. It listed several Henderson-owned properties, rental income figures, maintenance expenses, and a column titled Owner Distributions. The numbers were substantial, but David noticed something else. The expense ratios seemed unusually high for the types of properties listed, and then he saw it. A recurring large monthly payment to a vendor listed only as Vista Holdings for consulting services. The amount was suspiciously consistent, month after month, year after year, dwarfing legitimate maintenance costs. A cold thrill shot through him, sharp and clear. It smelled artificial. It smelled like a write-off. He casually flipped the page. On the back, almost obscured by a coffee ring, was a handwritten note, clearly from one premier accountant to another. Vista invoice for Q3 attached. Same as last year. Confirm offshore account details for transfer. MH wants it processed before the 15th. MH Mark Henderson. Offshore account. The words seemed to pulse on the page. This wasn't just aggressive accounting. This had the pungent aroma of deliberate fraud. A shell company, inflated expenses, siphoned offshore. The stone in David's chest ignited into a white-hot flame. "Eleanor," he said, his voice remarkably calm, "do you mind if I hold on to this summary page, just in case there are any discrepancies I need to clarify with Premier regarding your final statement?" "Keep it, dear, keep it all," Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Just tell me how much I owe or get back, and don't let that Henderson weasel cheat me." David assured her he wouldn't. After Eleanor left, he closed his office door. He sat in the quiet, the only sound the hum of his computer and the frantic beating of his own heart. The accidental evidence lay before him. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was a thread leading directly into the labyrinth of Mark Henderson's finances. And David Miller knew labyrinths. He knew tax codes. He knew the IRS. This was it. The moment he'd waited for. Not with fists, but with facts. Not with rage, but with relentless precision. The revenge wouldn't be loud, it would be bureaucratic. It would be cold. It would be taxable. The hunt began. David became a ghost in the machine. He didn't hack, he researched. Publicly available property records, business filings for Henderson Enterprises and its subsidiaries, including the elusive Vista Holdings, registered in Delaware with nominee officers, court records for tenant disputes that hinted at slush funds used for settlements, news articles quoting Henderson boasting about his complex, tax-efficient structures. He cross-referenced everything. He noted the extravagant lifestyle, the multi-million-dollar primary residence, the vacation home in Aspen, the yacht, the constant society page appearances. All seemingly incongruent with the reported income streams Henderson Enterprises publicly declared. He identified patterns, large recurring payments from Henderson-owned entities to obscure vendors like Vista Holdings, followed shortly by transfers flagged in international banking hubs known for secrecy. He found shell companies layered like an onion, obscuring the ultimate destination of funds. He saw evidence of personal expenses, luxury cars, private jet charters, even artwork, allegedly being run through business accounts as deductible expenses. It was a tapestry of deceit, woven with greed and arrogance over 20 years. David worked methodically, late into the nights, long after Sarah slept. He compiled his findings not as accusations, but as a roadmap of anomalies, inconsistencies, and potential violations of specific sections of the Internal Revenue Code. He documented everything meticulously, citing sources, highlighting connections, building a narrative of concealed income and fraudulent deductions. He knew the IRS prized clarity and specificity. They needed a case they could win. One evening, Sarah found him at his desk, bathed in the glow of his monitor, surrounded by printouts. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "David, it's midnight. Is this about Henderson?" Her voice was soft, laced with concern, not judgment. He swiveled, the intensity in his eyes momentarily startling her. Then he sighed, the fire banked. "Yes, I might have found something, Sarah. Something big. Something real." She pulled up a chair. "Tell me." He did. He showed her the trail, the patterns, the sheer scale of what he suspected. He explained the tax code violations, the potential penalties. He told her about the note on Eleanor's document. Sarah listened, her intelligent eyes scanning the papers. She wasn't a tax expert, but she understood deception, and she understood her husband. "It's overwhelming, David, and dangerous. For him, obviously, but are you sure? Are you sure this is the way, after all this time?" He took her hand. "I'm not setting him up, Sarah. I'm uncovering what he's already done. He stole our life. He built his on lies. This," he gestured at the documents, "this is just the truth catching up. The IRS isn't me. They're the law. If he's clean, nothing happens. But if he's not..." He didn't finish. The implication hung in the air. Sarah searched his face. She saw the years of pain, the quiet determination, but also the absence of the consuming rage that had once frightened her. This was different. This was justice. She squeezed his hand. "Then do what you have to do. But be careful. Be anonymous." David used every precaution. He filed his report electronically through the IRS's official whistleblower portal, Form 3949A, the information referral. He didn't claim the whistleblower award. Anonymity was his shield, his safety. His submission was a masterpiece of dry, factual accusation. No vitriol, no personal history, just a cold recitation of suspected violations, backed by dates, figures, company names, and specific sections of the tax code allegedly breached. Concealment of income through shell companies, Vista Holdings, others. Fraudulent business expense deductions, personal expenses disguised as business costs. Failure to report foreign financial accounts, potential FBR violations. Basis overstatement on property sales. He included copies of publicly available documents that supported his claims and referenced the accidentally disclosed Premier Summary page, anonymized to protect Eleanor, as the initial catalyst. He provided a detailed analysis of the money trail as best he could trace it publicly. He made it easy for the IRS to investigate. He planted the seed. Then he waited. Life continued. He helped clients. He had dinner with Sarah. They visited his sister Martha, now a retired librarian, who always saw too much. "You seem lighter, David," Martha observed one afternoon, sipping tea. "Or perhaps just focused differently." David just smiled. The stone was still there, but it felt different now. Less like a burden, more like a coiled spring. He monitored the news, business sections, real estate forums. Henderson Enterprises continued its splashy developments. Mark Henderson was photographed at galas, quoted in articles about market trends. David watched, his gaze analytical, detached. He knew the wheels of the IRS turned slowly, but they ground exceedingly fine. Months passed, then a year. David began to wonder. Had his report been ignored? Lost in the bureaucracy? Was Henderson too well connected? Doubt gnawed at him. Had he waited 20 years for nothing? Then the first ripple, a small buried item in the business press. Henderson Enterprises announces voluntary review of internal accounting procedures. David's pulse quickened. Voluntary? Unlikely. That sounded like damage control after an audit notice. More ripples followed, subtle but telling. Henderson cancelled high-profile public appearances. Rumors, faint at first, began to circulate in financial circles. Whispers of IRS scrutiny, of aggressive audits. David watched Henderson's public demeanor shift. The smug confidence wavered. Interviews became terse. The society page photos stopped. David felt no glee, only a cold, focused anticipation. He kept his head down, working on Mrs. Gable's small bakery books, helping old Mr. Peterson understand his retirement fund distributions. He was David Miller, the reliable taxman, but inside the meticulous accountant tracked the progress of an invisible storm. The storm broke 18 months after David filed his report. It wasn't a dramatic arrest at dawn. It was a dry legal headline. IRS files civil suit against Henderson Enterprises and CEO Mark Henderson for $28 million in unpaid taxes, penalties, and interest. David read the article online in his office, the words swimming before his eyes. The details were devastating. The IRS complaint laid bare the scheme. The shell companies, specifically naming Vista Holdings, the inflated expenses, the diversion of income offshore, the personal expenses fraudulently deducted. The amounts were staggering. The evidence cited mirrored, almost exactly, the trail David had meticulously mapped. He'd given them the blueprint. They'd followed it to the foundation of Mark Henderson's empire. He printed the article. His hands were steady as he placed it in a plain manila folder. He drove home, the familiar streets seeming sharper, clearer. Sarah was in the garden, planting late summer flowers. She looked up as he approached, saw the folder, saw the look on his face. "Is it?" He nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the printout. She read it silently, her eyes widening as she grasped the magnitude. 28 million, plus penalties, interest. She breathed. She looked up at David, tears welling, but not of sadness. "Oh, David." "It's not over," he said, his voice thick. "This is just the civil suit, the fraud. It's criminal." The civil case was a public evisceration. Henderson fought back, hiring expensive lawyers, spinning tales of complex accounting misunderstandings. But the IRS evidence was overwhelming, much of it stemming directly from the anomalies David had pinpointed. News outlets dug deeper. Former employees, smelling blood in the water, gave anonymous interviews hinting at pressure to cook the books. Henderson's carefully constructed image crumbled. The society pages turned their back. His developments stalled as financing dried up. Then came the knock David had both anticipated and dreaded, though not on his own door. The criminal indictment. Federal grand jury indicts real estate developer Mark Henderson on multiple counts of tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The trial was a media circus. David didn't attend. He followed every excruciating detail online and in the newspapers. He saw the photos of Mark Henderson entering the courthouse, flanked by lawyers, his face haggard, the cocky swagger gone, replaced by a hunted look. He saw the parade of witnesses, accountants, former executives, even a nervous bookkeeper from Premier Property Management. He saw the damning documents presented by the prosecution, the money trails, the emails hinting at deception. Keep Vista invoices vague MH, the blatant personal expenses charged to company accounts. It was the architecture of fraud, laid bare for the jury. David watched it all with a strange detachment. The raw fury was gone, replaced by a profound sense of completion. He saw the fear in Henderson's eyes, the crumbling of his arrogance, the public disgrace. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the annihilation of the persona Mark Henderson had stolen along with David's career. The revenge was colder, quieter, and far more devastating than any punch could ever be. The verdict was swift, guilty on all major counts. The sentencing hearing was covered live. David and Sarah watched it on their living room TV, holding hands tightly. Mark Henderson stood before the judge, looking diminished in a cheap suit, his expensive lawyers unable to shield him from the consequences. His wife sat rigidly behind him, her face a mask of humiliation. The judge recounted the crimes: the deliberate, sustained fraud, the betrayal of public trust, the sheer scale of the theft from the American taxpayer. He spoke of the need for deterrence. Then came the words: "The court sentences the defendant to 78 months in federal prison." 6.5 years. A murmur went through the courtroom. Henderson swayed slightly, his face draining of all color. As the marshal stepped forward to lead him away, a camera caught a close-up. The arrogant smirk was long gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated terror and the dawning realization of ruin. His empire was gone, seized or sold, to pay the massive fines and back taxes. His reputation was garbage. His freedom was gone. He was facing years behind bars, a middle-aged man stripped of everything. David clicked off the TV. The silence in the room was profound. He felt Sarah's gaze on him. He turned to her, expecting, what? Triumph? Elation? He felt empty. And then, incredibly, a wave of exhaustion so deep it threatened to buckle his knees. 20 years of carrying that stone, of nurturing that cold flame. And now it was done. Mark Henderson was going to prison. Justice, in its slow, bureaucratic way, had been served. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and earth from her garden. He didn't cry. He just held on, feeling the weight lift, leaving behind a vast, echoing space. "It's over," Sarah whispered. David pulled back slightly, looking into her warm, understanding eyes. He saw the lines time and worry had etched, but also the enduring love, the strength that had held them together. "It is," he said, his voice rough. "But Sarah, it doesn't bring back those lost years. It doesn't undo the pain." "No," she said softly, cupping his face. "It doesn't. Nothing can. But maybe now you can finally let it rest. We can finally rest. He's paid. Not with your fists, David. With his freedom. With everything he valued. You did it right. You did it clean." He looked around their comfortable, unassuming living room, the bookshelves filled with well-loved paperbacks, Sarah's knitting basket by her chair, photos of nieces and nephews on the mantel. It wasn't the life they'd planned 30 years ago. It was quieter, simpler, forged in hardship. But it was theirs, honestly built. He thought of his clients, the people he genuinely helped navigate their financial lives. He had purpose. He had Sarah. The cold stone of vengeance was gone. In its place was a profound weariness, yes, but also a burgeoning sense of peace, not forgiveness. Never that. Henderson's actions had caused too much deep, lasting damage. But acceptance. The account was settled. Later that week, David went up to the attic. In an old, dusty box marked CP MISC, he found it. A single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. At the top, written in his own furious younger hand, "Mark Henderson, what he owes." Below it was a list started 20 years ago in the motel room, added to sporadically over the years. My job, my reputation, the house, Sarah's smile, the baby's room, 10 years of struggle, every sleepless night. He read it slowly, each item a ghost of past anguish. Then, methodically, calmly, he tore the paper into tiny confetti-like pieces. He walked downstairs through the kitchen where Sarah was humming while making soup and out into the backyard. He scattered the pieces over the compost pile, let it turn to mulch, let it feed something new. He stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The past was a closed ledger. The future, finally, felt like his own. The revenge had been served, cold and precise. And in the quiet aftermath, David Miller found something sweeter than he'd ever imagined possible. The simple, unburdened freedom to live the rest of his life. He turned and walked back towards the warm light of the kitchen, towards Sarah, towards whatever came next.